Welcome to another episode of OG55. Today we're talking all about the pyramids. We're going to deep dive into a very nerdy conversation. I love stuff like this. We're going to talk about it. We're going to break it down, speculate all of our theories up next here on OG55. Let's welcome aboard, everybody, to another episode of OG55. Today, we're not talking about Disney. We're talking about the pyramids. We're going to talk about it. We're going to, throw some theories out there. Maybe some aliens will come up. We'll talk about all of that. Before we do, Mr. Webba, it's always good having you on, brother. It's been a while. How you been?
Yes, OG, thank you so much for having me on. I get to be on with you, Jared, and and of course Slimer, right? But yeah, this is gonna be fun. I love the pyramid talk. I love archaeology and just the kind of mysteries that surround us, right? So I'm very excited to get on it. But you can find me on all platforms at Mr. Webba91, and here on Orange Grove.
There he is, Mr. Webba91. Jared from Capture the Magic is back. It's always good to have you on, Jared. How you been, brother?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. I don't get to talk about pyramids often on live streams, and you said something about it. And I was like, I'm in, because this is one of those things. I've gone down some rabbit holes and watched a lot of stuff, and it's like the knowledge. Like my wife doesn't like hearing about it, so I just end up just consuming it. So it's nice to be able to talk about it. It's an interesting topic, and I'm excited to. Maybe we can figure it out in this live stream. Maybe we'll make some progress. Who knows?
Here we go. Let's do it. Yeah. Jared, where can everybody find you on social media?
You can find me at Cap the Magic. I don't talk about pyramids there often yet, but mostly theme parks and pop culture stuff. You can find me over there on YouTube and the social medias.
There he is, Jared from Capture the Magic. And last but certainly not least, we got Slime Square in the house, looking sharp with the polo. How you doing, Slime Square?
I'm doing great. Fantastic. Hey, thanks for everybody joining tonight. We're going to talk about pyramids, and forgive us if we're completely off base. We are theme park archaeologists, but today we're going to do some actual archaeology. So join us, shall you?
Yeah, absolutely. Where can they find you on social media, Simon?
Yep. So you guys can find me on Instagram at SlimeSquare84. You can find me on X at SlimeSquare.
There he is. Okay, so the other day, we were doing a show, and I think it was like maybe the pregame or maybe the after game, the post game, and we got into this topic a little bit about the pyramids. I'm like, okay, we got to talk about this, right? I'll start with you, Jared. There's been a lot of talk. There's been a lot of content out there, whether it be Netflix, whether it be YouTube, whatever. People have speculated about the pyramids for forever, really. What, in your opinion, do you think is kind of going on with these things? Because we've seen a lot of stuff about how, the angles are perfect, like they're laser cut and things like that. I mean, do you think the pyramids are all what they seem? Or do you think that as modern human beings, we don't even know the tip of the iceberg with this stuff?
My suspicion is that I kind of subscribe to the ancient civilization theory that there perhaps was a civilization that was wiped out. And if you think about that theory, like today, if something happened, what would be left of our civilization that people thousands of years ago would find? All our stuff is like on hard drives and in the cloud. So there really wouldn't be much to point to of like what our technology was. So I think in many ways that could have happened, where the things that would have led us in that direction either we got wiped away or throughout time, people get conquered, things get taken over and things like that. So I kind of subscribe to we don't know, and everything mostly is a guess. And I think there's some interesting things, especially around the Sphinx. And you get in, people have gone into the pyramids that I don't think they were made for tombs. I just don't buy that that's what the main purpose of them were. But that's where it gets interesting, is like, what were they made for and how did they make them is always where I get. Because like they've tried modern day cranes and things that can't even lift some of these blocks. So it's like, how did they do it? Back in that time.
Well, that's a great point. And the interesting thing too, Jared, that you bring up is when a civilization falls and we come in, years and years and years later to kind of look at it and kind of figure it out. I think most of the time we are wrong. Like, for example, in thousands of years, when eventually Disney's gone and the parks, just the remnants of the parks, you got this archaeologist digging, and he comes across like, you know, Sleeping Beauty Castle from Disneyland, you know?
Like, well, a kingdom was here.
Yes, a kingdom was here. Exactly. Who lived in this little castle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, the people that must have lived in this kingdom must have been this big, you know? And so there's a lot of assumptions that can be made with very, like, you're right. There's not a lot of context surrounding these things, you know?
And we tend to look through history like through our lens. So like our evolution of technology. And I think there are multiple different ways in which technology could evolve. And if we're looking through history just through this lens of what we know, it cuts us off from the possibilities of there could have been a lot of stuff that could have been their modern day. I'm not saying like modern like ours, but like their advanced technology that just doesn't fit our paradigm. And we just can't see it because we don't even understand it on a level like that. I think that could be part of what's gone on with it as well.
No, that's a great point too, and I've made that argument, a similar argument in regards to like alien life on other planets. It's kind of funny that when we venture out into, oh, we're getting real nerdy now, you guys. We're getting real nerdy. When we venture out trying to look for life, we always look for the Earth-like planets. Like we assume that this stuff is going to live on the same stuff that we live on,
right?
Like air and, you know. But for all we know, there could be a planet out there that the species live on something completely different. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But we assume that it's like, oh, well, they got to live like us, right? They got to breathe air, and so it's kind of interesting. But Mr. Webba, what are your thoughts on this, man? The pyramids. I mean, is it possible it was an ancient civilization that fell, that, you know, built these things, or was it, you know, aliens or something else? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, for me, at this moment, like for me, all possibilities are kind of open at this point, right? I'm just very curious because I love technology. I also love ancient history, right? And also I love astronomy too, right? And if there's other life forms out there, right, which I do believe there are, our universe is so massive. But what I want to know, going off of what Jared was talking about, is obviously the pyramids are huge, right? But we also have like Mayan pyramids, right? It's like, why were these huge, heavy stones or whatever type of rock that these were made of, why did they use those to build these giant monoliths, right? You know, I mean, nowadays we use cranes and tractors to put up like steel beams and, you know, wooden things, but these guys use like, you know, 15-ton rocks basically, right, in certain shapes and patterns to build these things. And it's like, why go through so much effort to build something like that? That's what I really want to know, is why and how.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because Jared, I don't want to cut you off, but we talked a little pregame about star maps and stuff. You want to elaborate? Because that might tie into what Webb is asking.
Yeah, so you've got a couple of guys, and what you're talking about how they built it, there is another theory that they actually weren't mined in that way or drug across. There's lots of questions about how they would have taken that much rock over. There is a theory that basically suggests that they had some sort of like, I guess you would just call it concrete of the day, and that the blocks were actually poured out of like limestone slurry and things like that. Instead of dragging them across, they kind of actually made them in like their day of concrete, which I find interesting. But the Orion correlation kind of is what a lot of people talk about. I think it's Robert Bouval had talked about this, and basically it correlates with the 3 stars of Orion's belt. And so each pyramid kind of represents that, because the ancients as well were like, they were obsessed with the stars. Like if you look at the Mayans, if you look at all these civilizations that had these pyramids, which, mind you, how did all these different civilizations that supposedly had no communication with each other all build pyramids on one way, which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think it could have had a some sort of representation of the stars. Especially if there was a cataclysm before, they would have been looking up a lot for warning signs and different things like that. I think it's a possibility. I think given how much ancient civilization did kind of look that way, not that was its sole purpose, but you could have seen them be aligned with their star map of the day.
Yeah, right. No, it's incredible they were able to do that. Go ahead.
Well, sorry. I want to ask this too, is that when they're building these pyramids, right, these ancient structures, how do they know how to do this, right? I mean, where did they learn the engineering for this to even be done in the first place? That's what I want to know. Like if you plugged me out and put me like in the desert somewhere and like, okay, go build me a pyramid, what? How? Like, I'm not going to know how to do that. So I'm very curious as to how they started with that. You know what I mean? And just to your point, the stars, they all had connections to the stars.
Well, it
So-
also points to like they would have had to have leisure time to develop the idea for pyramids too. Like hunter gatherers, or you're obsessed with surviving, so you would have to have got to a point, or someone gave you knowledge, which gets
Yeah.
into then that gets into Atlantis. That's a whole theory about, did Atlantis exist and did they travel out? Because that's a theory that's talked about. They would have passed knowledge on because, yeah, you're right. I mean, how did they figure this out, and how did they then have the time to go about doing this? But that's the other thing about it too. It's just there's just a ton. Like, I look at the pyramids, and the more I look into them, the more I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I find it super interesting, but it's like I don't think there's any concrete. Like, nobody knows for sure.
Well, it's kind of crazy to think about too. Then I want to get Slimer's take on this. It's kind of interesting too. I've heard a lot of theories how aliens have come to Earth, and it sort of helped the ancients build a lot of these things, and that's why we're seeing the precision. And even with like how it lines up with the stars and all that, it was there's theories out there that aliens came down and sort of assisted.
Or giants.
Ancients.
Giants are another one too. Nephilim. That's a very interesting if you look into that stuff.
Yeah, that's crazy. What say you, Slimer? What do you think about this, brother?
I'm really pretty boring when it comes to this case. I ascribe to the very boilerplate, the science when it comes to how these pyramids were built. I do follow the archaeology on this. I try to look for the simplest explanation. If the simplest explanation it does not corroborate with supporting evidence, then I look for outside explanations. So for me, the temptation to jump to like aliens or giants or lost knowledge, I really don't entertain a lot of that, despite the fact that I do believe in aliens. I have seen one of the Tic Tac UFOs back in the 1990s. So I'm certainly open to the idea of alien intervention in human society at different points throughout our existence. But when it comes to these, I think our archaeologists have a pretty good grasp on how these were built, and there's a lot of corroborating evidence that supports a lot of the engineering theories, and there's a lot of hieroglyphic inscriptions that they've been able to decipher to show that these are actually tombs for people that have been deified, because deification of human beings was very common pretty much all the way up until pretty much until the Middle Ages, right? I mean, we deified anybody. Caesars, pharaohs, kings, right? Divine right of kings was very big for about 1,000 years. And that was right pre-Renaissance, right? So within very recent history, we've deified human beings. And for me, it's very realistic for us to build these giant structures for tombstones of pharaohs sometime around 2100 BC. And with regard to the leisure time, we had it because humans were already agrarian societies by then. According to modern archaeology, we've been agrarian society for about 13,000 years. But I believe it's a lot older than that. Like Graham Hancock says, it's probably closer to 30 to 50,000 years. If we were to take Göbekli Tepe at its actual dated age. So that's pretty much where
kind of changes all that stuff once you start looking into that a little bit.
Yeah, Tempe, I think that's more accurate. I mean, when you consider the fact that Homo sapiens are really about 200,000 years old versus, we originally thought we were only about 50,000 years old to 100,000 years old. And the archaeological evidence between radiocarbon dating, geological strato testing, hydro, the I don't know what you call it, but when you're essentially testing watermarks at different geological levels, and they're corroborating all this, and they're looking at the evidence, and we're just getting older and older and older. So I mean, it stands to reason if biologically we haven't changed much in the last 200,000 years, it stands to argue that we wouldn't take almost 180,000 of that years to figure out how to become an agrarian society as opposed to hunter-gatherers, right? So that's why it makes sense for me that Göbekli Tepe is a lot easier to believe than the fact that, it only happened within the last 13,000 years. That just doesn't make any sense considering that Homo sapiens are on a minimal 200,000 year timeline.
So what are your thoughts on, because it kind of ties into the pyramids and the mystery of all this stuff, Slimer. What do you think
Mhm.
about like things like Stonehenge and stuff like that? I mean, do you think that's a similar situation? No outside involvement, just
Yeah, I don't think there's outside involvement. I think humans do really weird things, and um, when you consider the fact that we have deified human beings for thousands of years, and the fact that we also consider ourselves to be, or historically have considered ourselves to be an extension of the universe because of our obsession with the celestial bodies and how we have interpreted not just the celestial bodies, but the sun, the moon, the sky, basically everything in nature we have almost anthropomorphized, and that anthropomorphification of our relationship to nature has has been crafted in a lot of weird different ways. I mean, even within the last, I mean, like take theme parks for example. The fact that we have castles that look the same all across the globe,
yeah.
that if you were to dig them up 1,000 years from now, you'd probably think that there's this guy that had a Fred Mouse that we deified, right? You know, so and you know, it could be that the archaeologists are interpreting everything wrong, but I do believe that I do believe there is a lot of cross-verified evidence when it comes to like what's in the sarcophages and the hieroglyphics and texts that they have found and papyrus and things like that, to really nail down how it was built. Now one theory that I do like, and Mr. Webba mentioned it, was, I think it was you. If not, I apologize. But it's the idea that they were making their own concrete by essentially shaping boxes using wood, pouring it, and then letting it dry. That to me makes the most sense, as opposed to trying to create leveraging tools to try to get these multi-ton blocks up a pyramid. Absolutely makes no sense.
Well,
So they must.
Yeah, they had to move it like 500 miles, and how many people would it take? And like the whole idea of not only building it but getting the materials from the quarry that they were talking about, where they got them from. That to me was always, and they've even, like I said, the size of the blocks that they have, our modern day tech has a hard time handling it. So then it's like, well, okay, if they were able to do it, and they've tried testing some of this stuff out, it's like, well, then how? Like, what were they using? And then there are wild theories. There are like vibrations where that would make stuff levitate. Like, there's all sorts of stuff out there that people have tried to use to explain it. But I feel like the concrete one, that does make sense. That they could figure that, if they can figure the pyramids out, I think you could figure out ancient concrete potentially.
What's weird is that there is evidence of like copper tools and pounders and ramps and things like that they're used in construction. So it makes me wonder if maybe at one point they were actually using ramps and pulleys and things like that, but maybe they figured out how to use a powdered version as a solution to a problem at one point. And so maybe one of the pyramids were built with, you know, the traditional style where you're using leverage and pulleys and things like that. And they were actually dragging these big old things from the quarries. And then perhaps maybe they built one or two of them using a powder. But the thing is did they have the chemistry? I mean, they had chemistry back then. We know that because they were able to preserve bodies for thousands of years. So they weren't as primitive as we like to think they were, but they also weren't as advanced as I think we want them to be either.
Simon, to your point is that I don't think in any way, you know, they were dumb at all. Like I think they were. I think that we are as intelligent, or they have. If you took them, brought them to modern society, I do believe they could learn everything we know today. So I think the
100%
is there. For me, it's just like, it's the technology. Like, for example, the height, right? Like the Great Pyramid of Giza originally was 400 and, was it 481 feet tall? So I'm trying to figure, like, how do you get those huge stones, right? Whatever they're made out of, and drag them all the way up there, or however they're made. Like, to me, I'm not an engineer, so I can't wrap my head around that. But, so it's very interesting to try to think about how they did this. Now, if they're pouring that concrete, right? But then, okay, how do you then still move it to start building and stacking on top, going all the way around up, the pyramid?
Which could explain the ramps if they were pouring it, then pulling those. I mean, it's a shorter distance to pull it up. If you were to do that, like you had a thing on the ground, that makes way more sense that you could figure out a system to pull a block couple hundred yards maybe versus 500 miles, and then cutting it on top of it too. Like, how did they do it with copper tools? To like,
Yeah.
and you alluded to it, OG, about some of the inner chambers where the it's just perfect 90-degree angles, and there's perfect cut marks, and it's like how, and like we would have a hard time today being that precise on some level, but it's
but Jared, I'm very curious. I would love to see like for like a scientific experiment, like them actually like trying to replicate and build like a pyramid, you know, like out there, and see if they can do it with, you know, what they believe how it was done. Right. I'm very curious to see how that would turn out.
I don't know if they've done it with the pyramid. There's other archaeological stuff, like, you know, Slimer mentioned Göbekli Tepe and other ones where they've tried to replicate. I can't remember where it's at. There's this massive wall with these. They're almost like they look like clouds that were just formed together, and how big they are. And they've actually done some experiments of trying to use like a crane to pull these, and they can't do it. And even transporting. So I don't know if it was with the pyramids, maybe on something else, but they've tried similar types of experiments on just like, if our modern machinery could do it, and many times it can't even do it. But I will say, what doesn't help, you know, Slimer, you're talking about like the archaeologists, which I'm not saying that it's wrong, but I don't know if you guys know who Zahi Hawass, I think is his name, the guy that's in charge of Egypt, basically, of the archaeology. That guy does not help anything, considering he'll ban people. He banned Graham Hancock from even going to Egypt because he was asking questions.
Really?
And then you bring up the Sphinx, as they do allude to, there is actually water erosion on the Sphinx, which would lead to the Sphinx being much older than the pyramids. So if the Sphinx was there, and the other theory would be that the Egyptians didn't actually build the pyramid, somebody else did, which is an interesting one too.
Well, what's really interesting about that, and just to kind of give illuminate the kind of timeline we're talking about here. So when Cleopatra was alive, she was actually closer to the age of us than she was at the age of the pyramids, I believe. Let me make sure I get that right.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's something along those lines.
She was closer to the age of us than she was of the pyramids, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
I think there was a massive amount. There was centuries difference between.
Some people have theorized the Egyptians came upon the pyramids, and they then used them for tombs because they didn't know what they were used for, which is interesting, because if that's what the Egyptians used them for, it's very possible. But then you got to think, and maybe they did, but it's like, would you build these massive pyramids just for, you know, your deities, which is possible, but it gets the Sphinx thing gets really interesting. Considering the erosion, the face has been chiseled. They've changed the face of it. At some point, it was changed, and that's where you get to like, we'll just never know what was there. Like, they don't have photographs of the thing. But if the Sphinx is that much older, then there was somebody before that built the Sphinx and did some stuff before the Egyptians came along.
So here's some clarification. Thank you, ChatGPT. So it looks like according to geological samples, radiocarbon dating, all that stuff, looks like the Sphinx of Giza was built approximately around the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, which is around 2558 to 2532, which places it in the mid 3rd millennium BCE, roughly about the same time as his pyramid. So looks like there's also theories that push a lot older, that are, you know, they push it to 7 to 5,000 BC, which is what we were referencing. I'm going to default to the experts on that one. But I think though that if I were to look at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, which I haven't studied, but if I were to look at it, I think I would see something that looks like a sphinx in their symbology. So for it to be historically separated by 1,000 or more years from the pyramids, I guess just using reason, I find that a little bit harder to swallow than these things being 7 to 5,000 years older.
Well, where this comes from, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to hog it up here, OG. It comes from Robert Schock. I don't know if you guys know who he is. So I took a note on this because I find this interesting. He said the research on the Sphinx, basically, it could have been built during a period where it was wetter there. It actually was greener. So it suggests the Sphinx could have been built during a much wetter period around 10,500 BCE, which would be thousands of years before the accepted date of construction of the dynastic Egyptians. And then now there is some evidence of water erosion on it, but you don't have it on the pyramids, which one would assume you would, which I
Right.
think is why they date this potentially the Sphinx as being older, because not the same erosion is on the pyramids.
Well, and that's why we don't even know the tip of the iceberg with a lot of this stuff, in my opinion.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's complicated because it could have just been sitting inside of like a man-made pool, you know.
Well,
and so the statue could have just sat in water that has been put there on purpose because they wanted to sit in some kind of like a body of water, the same way you would have a fountain, you know, sitting in its own, you know, reservoir there. So, but we don't know that, so we can't claim or deny anything like that. It's just hypothetical without any evidence.
Well, I remember for the longest time, I remember growing up as a kid, all the experts all thought dinosaurs were reptiles. Like they were more similar to reptiles. And as we got older and as they studied this stuff more, they're actually closer to birds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like
weird to think a raptor is a bird.
It's weird, right? And it's like that's the kind of stuff that really makes me second guess when, you know, archaeologists or people go in there. I mean, I'm not negating their expertise, but I feel like there's been a lot of times when the experts have been wrong. And then later on, we find out, oh, it's something totally different. You know what I'm saying? So it's
and that's where like I naturally don't trust experts or authority. I'm just kind of naturally wired that way. Yeah. But it doesn't help their case, as you know, people have these theories and it's fun to talk about this stuff, but then they will go into banning people from Egypt or just trying to silence them. And then you've got egos involved. People built careers off of certain theories. But anytime you go around the route of trying to basically, instead of debating it and using your reason or facts against another one, you try and just shut the other person down. I always then lead to like, well, what are you trying to hide? And there would be motivation to suppress things if it went against like talked about it. I can't remember how to say his name. Zahi Was, I think is how you say his name. He went on Joe Rogan not that long ago. It did not have a great interview because anytime Rogan had questions about this stuff, he would just say, well, I'm the expert. And you're like, well, okay, like that doesn't help. And then there's also been people that have accused him of potentially finding things and selling them on the black market. There has been those accusations about him. Who I'm not saying I know it's true or not. It's just allegedly. And then there is the other one too about there was a German archaeologist that found a secret or like a sealed door back in the 30s. And they went down there and then and once they went down there, they sealed it up and nobody's been in there since. And it's like, well, why would you not, like, you found a sealed door in the pyramids and you didn't go down there? And you're still not to this day allowed to go down there.
See, so that's the kind of stuff that makes me, I'm like you, Jared. I question everything. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like, I'm not saying that this stuff is like what we know is legit. I'm not saying that, but I wouldn't be shocked. I'll say that much if there was another version of this.
Human nature alone points to, you know, people are corruptible. People have, you know, lots of ulterior motives on all sorts of things. So it's I don't look at any person as just infallible. So I think, especially if there's money and power and, you know, then it gets into the politics of a region, perhaps, like, you know, there's lots of reasons as to why they would do it, but it doesn't help their credibility either. If you talk about these, like, I think Joe Rogan brought it up on this episode and he just wouldn't even talk about it. He was just like, oh no, there's nothing down there. And you're just like, well, then take a camera, like show people what's down there. And he's like, no, there's nothing down there. And it's like,
yeah, okay. That's a little fishy. That's a little sketch. That's a little sketch. Right. You know what I'm saying? Well, I don't doubt. I mean, I think we did a video on it not recently, but a year ago, Slimer, about aliens visiting Earth and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, Jared, it's like that. It's like where, you know, authority doesn't want to maybe there is good intention where they don't want to panic the masses with an alien, and, you know, an alien has come here on Earth, but there's a lot of hiding, right? Like, oh yeah, nothing to see here kind of stuff. And it's just like, I don't know.
And then recently they're disclosing it as if like and you're like, well, then then why are you now telling me? Because now I don't trust you telling me either. I'm like, well, wait a minute. You denied this for like 100 years. And now you're like, actually, it's real. I'm like, well, hold on. Like, what, you know, I just don't trust people in power a lot in general and stuff like that. But no, the alien stuff too, that's a whole other thing that's very interesting.
Absolutely. What say you, Webba? I'm sorry, I cut you off, brother.
I was gonna say, well, the thing with science, right, is that it's always good. I mean, that's why we have science, right? It's scientific discovery. It's fun, right? As humans, we love to discover and we're curious, right? But at the same time, like how do you do science when you can't look over your bias or your own beliefs, or you're trying to, with human nature, cover something up, right? You're being shady, right? Like that tomb thing, right? And it's like, how can you guys society and civilization progress if there's not things you're allowed to discover or find out about, right? Because science, we're about exploring and we're curious about the world around us, history, space, the ocean, right? Everything, the human body. So I think that, yeah, Jared, there's powers that be, man, that, they just don't want you to know this stuff, unfortunately. And here's the thing, I would rather know that there's aliens. Actually, it's probably better us that we know that there's aliens than all the crap that we have going on in society right now.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm telling you.
Agree with that.
Well, and here's the thing too. It's like people, you talk to people like, oh, do you believe in aliens? I'm like, oh yeah, I believe in aliens. It's literally statistically impossible for the universe to be as big as it is, and for us to be the only living, like there has to be, now maybe we can't get to it, but it's there.
That's always been my theory. It's so far away that we just reasonably can't even fathom being there. I think they even asked Elon Musk, which anybody that would know would probably be him that's alive today. And I think he said one time that he's found no evidence as of yet, but they're always kind of finding stuff on Mars. I think they recently found water. Like, I think I read that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Like they did. Yeah. They found some rather evidence of that. And so, yeah, there is that. Now, have you ever heard of the theory that we actually came from Mars?
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I wonder if it's the same theory. Is it the one where we came from Mars and we came here and terraformed Earth?
That's there's because they said like Mars would have something would have hit Mars or known it was coming and moved here, which is, I don't know how they get to that theory, but
so I have a question for you, right? It's cool if you can terraform a planet, right? But here's my question to you. If you have the technology as a civilization to terraform another planet to be livable and habitable for your species and for life, why can't you kind of, I don't know, fix whatever the problem is for your own planet? That's kind of where my question is, like, I mean, I get it'd be cool to go conquer other planets or whatever. Awesome. But if Earth is dying or there's going to be a comet that's going to come hit it, if you have that tech to save a planet, why not save your own planet?
Good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it would go into what type of issue. If it was a potential comet hit, then it would go into. Then if you can go to another planet, though, then you would have space travel. But maybe they didn't have. I guess it would come to like, did they have explosives? Like you're talking. Like I've always felt like there's like our technological advance was the combustion engine that really took us down this path.
Yeah,
there could have been a different way in which technology could have gone that wasn't that way. So maybe you're talking they had technology, but they didn't have combustible. They didn't have fire. They had, other things. So yeah, but then how do you get to Earth? Like, then you're just stuck in the thing of like, well, why? Yeah. It's like a bunch of how would you do it? Why would you do it? And why didn't you do it this way? And yeah, that's why I love this stuff, because there's no clear answer. You can just sit there and look at it all. And the more you look into it, you're like, I have no idea. I don't know.
Yeah. It lets your imagination run wild, which is pretty cool. Slimer, I want to ask you, because we talked about aliens before, okay, and we're talking about pyramids today. The oceans, I feel like we haven't really explored the oceans as much as we haven't. I mean, it's hard for us to go deep, into the deeper waters and really get in there. Is it possible that we have? And this is kind of like this Atlantis sort of theory, but any kind of civilizations down there that we're not aware of, maybe even like alien civilizations or maybe even human civilizations, Yeah,
absolutely. It's very possible. And it's possible that we'll never discover them either, considering the pressures of the sea. The thing about time or erosion over a long period of time is that it can completely eliminate any sort of evidence that a civilization can ever even exist, which is why it's crazy that we have evidence of dinosaurs to begin with at all. I mean, it's a miracle, really, if you think about it. I mean, think about, for example, a roadkill on the side of the road. Within a matter of like a month, it's completely gone. Nobody picked it up, right? It's just been it's just been eaten completely by wind and animals and ants and it's only been a month. So when you compact that over millions and millions, if not billions of years, the fact that we have anything preserved at all is pretty miraculous, but it's certainly possible. Will we ever discover? I think we're very limited as to what we can discover because of things like the water pressure and erosion and tectonic shifts and things like that. So we'll never get a full picture. Unfortunately, I don't even think we'll get a full picture of how many different species have existed on the planet at any single, well, not on any single point in time, but throughout the history of time, ever since biological species have existed on here anyway. But that's the thing about our history is that it's always going to be incomplete, unfortunately. And then when you try to understand Mars, it's even worse because Mars has been inhabitable for hundreds of millions, if not billions of years. And so to try to find any sort of evidence of any civilization on there at all is going to be quantifiably more difficult, considering how much more barren and how much more devastating the surface of that planet is exist on.
I do like the theory that a lot of people theorize aliens, like we know so little about the water underneath us.
Yeah,
like so little. And there's some evidence. There was a UFO, I think it was a couple of years ago, that it came out of the water almost like there was no splash. It just would come in and out of the water. It would make a lot of sense that there would be stuff down there, and that's where they would potentially come up. Like that whole thing is very interesting because that's just a world that, like Slimer said, we're not even able to really get down there.
Well, I think this
own thing.
Yeah. I think the ship was one of the Tic Tac UFOs.
Yes,
and apparently
apparently
those Tic Tac UFOs are immune to deep oceanographic pressures because of the materials that they use. And apparently, since they use like anti-gravitic propulsion systems, it's not like they're even really traveling through physical barriers. They kind of just create their own gravity wake.
Yeah,
and
they're not using like propulsion like we know.
No, they're using gravity. They're like bending space time. So Webba actually sent me a link to a video that just got recently declassified, which is this Hellfire missile that was shot upon one of these unidentified aerial crafts. It was one of the Tic Tac UFOs. And what's crazy about it is when the Hellfire missile impacted it, it did a little spin, and then there was these 3 fragments that broke off of it, but maintained the exact same velocity as the ship right behind it, which if you've ever seen any video of a aircraft airborne while moving in a direction being impacted by a missile, the fragmentations usually just drop right off, right? Because the gravitational force, even though it's a weak force, it's stronger than the force. It's stronger than the inertia that it had pushing it forward, right? So it pulls it down. But this, it kept going the same velocity, which means that the gravitational force that it was projecting behind it, let's say, to propel itself forward, was actually really strong to make it go at the same velocity as the ship. Either that, or it's a counter defense mechanism that was activated, and then there's like 3 little satellites that popped off of it that can intercept, projectiles. I don't think that's the case. I think that requires more explanation if you're trying to look for the simplest answer. So I'm going to go with anti-gravitic propulsion system.
Some of these, I gotta find the article, but I forgot. It was some kind of investigator that was looking into a downed alien aircraft, a UFO. And I'll never forget the description this guy had of this ship. He said the outside of the ship, the physical ship, was smaller than the inside. And I'm like, I can't wrap my head around that. So it would be like getting into a car, and once you're in the car, it's the size of a mansion inside.
Like Doctor Who, like getting into like the thing. Yeah.
It's weird. And like, that's bizarre to me.
Was it Robert Schoch that was saying that? He's been the one that's talked about this a lot. I think he was one that also said there is basically like a lot of our tech has come from downed like UFOs and things, but it's basically like a toddler tinkering with a nuclear bomb. It's like we don't even know the capabilities of, like, we're able to get something off of it, but that I think he'd also said some of the people that had worked on these died. Like they would die of almost like radiation poisoning.
Oh shit.
And that happened a lot. And so it's like you're just dealing with stuff that like essentially we have zero comprehension of, other than we can take some of the tech off of it and apply it to what we do know, which is gets real wild.
Well, and it's crazy to me thinking about even having any kind of engagement with aliens, right? Because even on Earth with other human beings, just the language barriers, the cultural differences, there's a lot of, wars get started, all that stuff, right? How do you interact with another, like with an alien species? Like how do you know that they won't take what you feel is a friendly gesture
Well,
the wrong way,
well, not to that exact question, but to a question of like sending signals out to find intelligent life. I can't remember if it was Michio Kaku or Neil deGrasse Tyson, but one of them said that you would communicate with mathematical equations.
Yep.
And and so that's how you would find out, because then they would communicate that back. Now the problem is the time of communication, right? Because you send something out, it's going to take like millennia to get over there, So, I mean, because even like we hear about, Earth getting hit with these, what is it, like, Jared? I think like some type of radio waves or something, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, if there's any other type of waves that are coming in, how long have those been traveling for? And whoever made that message, right? Like let's say it is aliens, right? Like, are they already dead? Like, have years passed, by the time
like, they talk about a lot of the stars we see, a lot of them we're just now seeing them, but they're not even there anymore, which that becomes a mind trip too, because you're like, what you're seeing is so far technically from the past, and you're just now able to see it, and it's just that stuff it starts getting really interesting, because you just get into that. But the theory that I will say, we're talking about the pyramids again, the one theory that I don't know if I believe it, I think it makes sense if you're talking about a ancient civilization having a different form of technology that we would understand, is the pyramids potentially being a power plant. I don't know if you guys ever heard this one before.
No.
But one of them is, I don't know if one of them or all of them, they're built over the water table. And so the theory would be they were using like crystals, quartz and things like that, and basically using vibrations from like the tectonic plates of the earth that could resonate, and then that would create like some sort of energy, not like what we have necessarily, but like a type of energy that they could have used in that time to do.
That's wild.
So sorry to cut you off, but I want to ask again, how did they figure that out? If that's the case.
I know. When then that gets into, if you guys ever listen to Jimmy Corsetti, he's interesting. He's on YouTube. He talks about Atlantis. He thinks it was, I mean, there's a lot of theories, but he's like, he presumes it could have been real. And Graham Hancock talks about there's these civilizations after the flood happened, which that goes into the, what do they call that? I forget off the top of my head now. Basically, there was a meteor hit that flooded most of the earth, which they have basically shown that more than likely happened. That you had these people just show up, and these different civilizations all have similar accounts of these people showing up and having like bags and things, and they were teaching information, and they were showing civilizations how to do things. I suppose you could have had something like that, or alien, I don't know, or aliens showed up. And that's the question, like, well, how did you figure it out? Like, what did you know? And then that got wiped out at some point, and nobody, it's like today, if we got wiped out, how long would it take, or would anybody ever figure out like Wi-Fi again?
Right. Well, that's also my question too, right? It goes back to like languages and like, other different types of race of people, right? We're all human beings, but we all have different, skin colors, heights, weights, bone density, right? Like, and from all around the world. And I'm thinking, okay, all these groups of people, these regions had to learn mathematics, science, all this stuff, right? But someone has to teach them this stuff. So where did they learn, and why do different groups of people look different from each other? Why do I look different from Slimer? Why does Theme Park Wizard look different from me? Right? Like why does everybody look different, right? And it's just, is there different like, if you want to go by the alien theory, has Earth been visited by multiple different various of races or species of intelligent life have come down here and kind of assisted each area of the population with, building civilization, teaching them, mathematics, language, stuff like that.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's a great point. That's a great point. Well, and it's interesting too, is like, was it Neil deGrasse you were saying who said we would communicate with mathematics?
It was either Neil deGrasse Tyson or Michio Kaku. One of the two. I mean, one's a string theorist, the other one's an actual physicist. But they both talk about space. So,
but here's the thing. Here's what, and those guys are really smart. I'm not like negating that, but like, who's to say they use math, aliens? Like, what if they don't have numbers? Like, because we have that's a thing that we have, but do they use numbers like we use numbers? Like how?
Well, I think they get that from, if you look throughout the universe, there's like basically mathematical equations that are consistent, kind of all the more they've looked, like discovered. Yeah, but again, it goes to that's through our lens too. It could be that you're talking about a similar thing that they interpret differently, though. But if they are advanced, I mean, they might look at it as the cockroaches figured out how to make some sounds that we understand. We're like, oh, that cockroach say something to me? Like, did he, like stuff like that? Like in my head, that's kind of how it might go. Like they would be aware of like that cockroach is doing Morse code. That's strange. I haven't heard that in a long time. Like maybe, but yeah, I think that's where the idea of it comes from is mathematical equations kind of all throughout the galaxy. I think it may have been Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think I want to say I've heard him talk about that.
Yeah, I think it was him. But it's interesting, right? Because with the pyramids, like Jared, you brought up the giants, right? I mean, because with giants, I also want to talk about this too. Now, obviously, Slimer, you were talking about dinosaurs, right? I freaking love dinosaurs, right? And dinosaurs are awesome, right? But is there any theories out there that humans and dinosaurs at some point in time coexisted?
There's no evidence that corroborates the existence of human dinosaurs at the same time.
Okay, is there any evidence about humans and some type of giant animals of some kind that will maybe help with the pyramids, like lifting the giant stonework or anything like that?
There's actually a lot of texts that have been found that mentions giant people.
Well, I was going to say the atmosphere would have supported it. That's how I mean, today dinosaurs couldn't have existed in our atmosphere.
No,
because it's been degraded over time. So that's, right. I mean, there's even theories of certain mountains that have been broken off that some people theorize are big rocks that may have been massive trees, because of the atmosphere would have provided the ability for people to be bigger. So when you talk about giants, it could have been like a Shaq of the day, but back then Shaq in our day is like 7'2". Mm-hmm. It could have been much taller just naturally back then. That could, like you talk about the Nephilim and things like that. Like that's what's interesting is the atmosphere of what it allowed, like bigger plants, bigger people. That's why potentially they say when you start talking about like people living so long in like the Bible and ancient texts of like people would have lived longer under an atmosphere like that too, because it'd been more nourishing. So lifespans could have been longer, which could explain more knowledge of certain things. People living longer, passing it down to different ones, and then slowly that degrades off.
Yeah, that's wild to me. And I also wonder, you talk, Webba, about, humans and dinosaurs living together at one point. I also wonder too, like, whenever we think about life on other planets, we always assume like other human beings or like animals that we're familiar with or whatever, or bugs. But there's got to be a planet out there somewhere that still has dinosaurs. There's got to be. There's got to be. I mean, if we got them.
Unless dinosaurs were a psyop, there is that theory.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, that's pretty dope though, I mean, even stuff like the dinosaurs though, I think we know very little. I mean, we know stuff, but I think that I've
always wondered how they just knew that like they roar, like we assume it today, but it's like, how would you know that the T-Rex did that? Like I think there's a lot of assumptions, just like trying to connect the dots on, you found these bones and like you were saying, that we thought they were lizards and more like birds, and then that changes like your idea of dinosaurs. But I think with pop culture, you're not going to make Jurassic Park with a bunch of giant birds. They just be like, oh, that's not cool. Like, okay, make them how we think about them.
Is it possible that they found the bones that create the vocal sounds, and that's how they started to put together how they create these sounds? Or if perhaps maybe if they were more related to birds, that they can just extrapolate that they probably make sounds very similar to birds, to consider they have a lot of other phenotypes to birds themselves. So it just stands to reason like the sounds are going to sound similar, or maybe be have a relational aspect to it. That could be it.
Probably.
I don't think
it'd be funny if the T-Rex sounded more like an emu though, and not like
I wouldn't doubt that. Yeah, it probably really does, and I think that the way they sound in the Jurassic Park movies are completely false.
Well,
I
and
would assume, yeah.
yeah, and I think that that's also where a lot of this gets blurry because does science say that they roar, or is it Spielberg who kind of set that kind of
It's
tone?
Spielberg who said that.
Right. So that's what I'm kind of like. I would, yeah. That's the other
Like
thing.
our
You know?
idea of dinosaurs, a lot of it really comes from Jurassic Park. I think,
Right.
I mean, for most
Yeah.
people, I think that's where a lot of people's idea of what they did and how they moved and sounded, it probably comes from that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know.
And how do they know? Like when they find like a T-Rex skeleton or whatever, how did they know this thing didn't have feathers on it? Like maybe it did look like a giant bird, but we don't. How do you know? Just from the bones, it was like scaly, right? Like,
well, what's interesting, you're talking about finding him. There's he's been on Joe Rogan before. He's got this. They call it the boneyard, but this guy bought a piece of land. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, Slimer. It's basically in his area of land. There is like thousands of woolly mammoths that were like basically died all at once, and they've been finding them. So like he's got all these woolly tusks he finds and pulls out, and they basically the idea is that a comet hit, and essentially at the same time the atmosphere comes in, you freeze to death, and then fire comes down, and then you're just encased. Like this happens instantaneously, but they were all caught in this. But in this area of land, it doesn't make any sense that there's this many woolly mammoths that all died at the exact same time. So it points to some sort of cataclysm.
Right.
Which then gets into like other cataclysms back in the day of, you know, are these cyclical? Do they happen often? You know, all sorts of stuff like that. But I can't remember that guy's name. He's interesting. He's been on Rogan like twice. But I think he's like a gold miner that bought this piece of land, and they just happened to come across all this stuff on there.
that's wild.
What's crazy is that, you know, when the woolly mammoths were alive, they were around for like 2 million years.
Yeah. Are they trying to bring him back? I heard
I
recently.
think so. Yeah, I think they're
Yeah.
trying to bring back the woolly mammoths, but
Let's do
yeah,
it.
I mean the Pleistocene era was predominantly dominated by Neanderthals, and Neanderthals were almost as smart as humans, if not as smart as humans, but they were just physiologically superior. They were probably about halfway the strength from us to gorillas. And so they were able to actually fight saber-toothed tigers, and they were actually able to hunt down woolly mammoths and things like that. But they survived for, I don't know, quite a long time. I think at this point they've been around longer than humans have been around, and yet there's little to no evidence of their existence.
And then like why did we survive and they didn't?
Yeah,
You know,
right.
like,
Right.
what happened, sort of thing. I mean, it could maybe malnourishment. Who knows? You know, then that gets in a lot of those questions.
Yeah.
I think that we have a level of intelligence that surpassed them that came to survivability, and I don't know if that's like a sociological intelligence or not sociological, a social intelligence. Perhaps I think that's most likely the case, and perhaps our communication is what led to our survival because Homo sapiens were around at that time, only towards the tail end of that epoch. But the Neanderthals didn't have the ability to communicate like we did. And a lot of that is contributed to the not the prefrontal cortex, but the part of the brain that constitutes communication.
Yeah. Wild stuff. Wild stuff. Oh, go ahead, Webba.
So Slime Square and Jared, I have a question for you guys. Same question, but Slime Square, I want your scientific analysis on this, and then Jared, I want your awesome theories on this. So, pyramids and their hieroglyphics, right? Or like the statues of like, you know, half human, like a human with like a bird head or something like that, right? Like what is with the half human and half animal thing going on in like these statues, hieroglyphics? Is it some type of like religious thing that they have going on? Or is this like, hey, we got aliens that were over here experimenting with like hybrid of animal and like bird people? Like what's going on with this?
So I think that the animals are used to depict gods that they worshipped. And when you're looking at a statue of like, let's say, a cat or man cat or man dog, right? What that is a certain deity that they worship. That's what that is. When you take Isis and Osiris, for example, those are gods. You know, those are not human gods. These are actually unmaterial metaphysical beings that exist in their religion. But any sort of statue is a representation of these metaphysical beings, which they considered in the, you know, their religion was primarily not, they weren't there with them, but they were in the afterlife, right? So that's where they ruled from, was the afterlife, for example, which is why if you look at the pyramid text, which is the oldest known religious text, in it are writings that date back to about 2300 BCE, and in it are spells, prayers, and hymns and ritual instructions that help the pharaohs guide their way to the netherworld. Pretty interesting stuff. The instructions are actually inscripted in the walls in a lot of these pyramids, so that way the pharaohs don't lose them as they're traveling to the afterlife.
You know, what if, and this is kind of a weird kind of theory, then I'll take it over to you, Jared, but like, because if you're a primitive civilization, let's say, or even not even primitive, let's say you're like just like us, modern man, and aliens came down and they had spaceships and, you know, lights coming from their ship beaming people up, is it possible that the ancient human beings interpreted that as gods and like the afterlife? Like if you're getting beamed up, because we always talk about this, right, with the afterlife and like how you're going through a light tunnel and things like that. Well, I mean, in theory, if you're an ancient man and they beam you up, you're going through that same kind of light tunnel. And is it possible there's some interpretations here of like what they're saying are gods, but really they were other beings in our universe that we're visiting? I know it's kind of, you know, kind of hoity-toity, but what do you think, Jared? Is that possible?
Well, it's kind of like there's those civilizations that are still around that never had human contact with anybody from the outside world. So if they see a helicopter, what would they interpret that as? Like, and that would make sense. You never see anything else. You would just be like, oh my gosh, this is a god. This is, you know, our brain doesn't know where to put this.
It's a crazy bird. Look at that, you know?
Right. And which that gets interesting. So yeah, you could sit there and that's where they see a bird and that becomes a deity. Or, you know, then you get into like even the Aztecs with like the sun god and things like that. Yeah, I've always thought about that too, of like, if you've never seen it, what would be and back then, not as many people as now. So you're talking about a smaller group of people. What would they come together to have a conclusion? They have their committees about what did we see? And they just give like, okay, all right, we're going to have these different gods. We're going to kind of, you know, however they came about that would be interesting. But to Webba's thing, I tend to agree with Slimer on that. I mean, I don't know a lot about those. I think some of them point to at different places, like the duality of man. Many times they would take animals as part of that. It could have been like a classification system of potentially class system, or also with the gods as well. The hieroglyphics are interesting. What's interesting too about the pyramids, you would assume with all the stuff that they recorded, to my knowledge, I don't think they have anything about how they built them. And you would assume if they built them that they would have kind of had more records of what they did, sort of thing. I could be wrong on that. I'm trying to think if I remember that correctly, but that's what kind of gets me about as much stuff as they did record. What they didn't record is also kind of interesting.
Very true, because you talked about that, how they inherited the pyramids. They didn't build them; they kind of repurposed them. It's like the Mission Breakout thing, right?
Yeah. What would you do if you came upon, like, you're just back in the day and you come across these giant pyramids? And back then they had, what was it, silver? What was it? They had a covering that was like a shiny covering, is the theory. Yeah. They were more silver, which points to the fact that they could have been used for maybe they're harnessing the sun for some sort of energy source or something too.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. Go ahead, Webba.
Oh, I was saying, but yeah, like it's interesting because like with pyramids, right, in other cultures, they were all very into like astronomy, stars, but also very into the religious and death experiences, right? Like there's a lot of commonalities. I mean, it's in their own way, but they were all very much into that, and I find that really interesting because, you know, like these gods or like these godlike figures, you know, the afterlife, you know, there are pyramids, you know, aligning with certain stars in the sky. So I'm very curious as to, like, for example, Atlantis, right? Like, as crazy as it sounds, was Atlantis some city that just like was like a spaceship and just like left the earth?
Right.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy.
well, Earth is right now going to be a disaster. So let's take our entire city and like launch it out of here. You know?
Well, Jimmy Corsetti has some videos where he theorizes it. You know, it's all theory, of course. He even says that, but it's like if Atlantis was real and they were advanced, they would have known. Like they knew about the comet or something coming in, and they fled, knowing that with all the knowledge they had to preserve it. So the idea would be to somehow survive it and then go back and try and spread that knowledge to the survivors of after the flood. Which either way, I mean, if Atlantis was real, and then there's some stuff of like who's the philosopher that talked about it? He's Plato.
Talked about what?
Atlantis.
Plato.
He's like Plato. What's a Plato?
Yeah.
Okay. So like, was he just making it up, sort of thing? Like then you get into like all sorts of different things like that. But I find Atlantis very interesting as well. About there's some theories about where they think it could have been. It matches the descriptions of it, and then all that stuff. And that whole world is wild, because then if the pyramids are that old, or if they came upon them, then what would have been before them? And that's just, we don't even know, like no idea. So like there's really like, it's all theory about how they were built, which is still crazy in this modern day. We still don't know.
Well,
no, that is crazy. Go ahead, Webba.
Sure. Well, back to your point about the really small, less civilizations, that the tribes that don't have any contact with the outside world, right? Going back to the analogy of seeing the helicopter or whatnot, I wonder if they can maybe use that, if possible, to try to find out what they would interpret airplanes and stuff as, right? And see if they can kind of maybe match similar descriptions to other ancient civilizations, and see if they thought this was this, what did the ancient civilizations depict on their walls of what something that looks like this, that
like a live experiment with a group of people. Yeah. Right. I feel like though that would take so long, but I mean, who knows how long those beliefs took to form too.
Sure.
Did they take hundreds of thousands of years, like however long it took them? I mean, it is interesting that there are still civilizations that are they have not had any outside contact. And like every once in a while you'll see footage of, I think there was somebody that went to one of them foolishly. It was like, I'm going to go there. And they just killed him immediately.
Yeah.
And they were cannibals and they ate him too. And I think, wasn't this in Papua New Guinea, if I'm not mistaken?
I think so. There was some guy that went, and he didn't last very long. You're just like, that's not that. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. There are societies like the equivalent to humans from like 13,000 BCE or something like that. I mean, they don't even have complex ideas of the afterlife. Their ideas of the afterlife are less complex than the Egyptians.
Yeah.
And the Egyptians
you guys had the timelines of them creating that and interpreting their world. Yeah, you probably couldn't replicate it, because who knows what they actually experienced to have the views they had. That then get then you talk about passing down and becomes part of myth and all those things too.
Well, what's pretty wild is that the Egyptians are the first ones to have the complex ideation of an afterlife that the way they do. And it was so complex that they actually separated the body, the mind, and the spirit. So they understood the trifecta, which is actually something that permeated all through, Christianity, and it's still a big part of how we conceive ourselves as human beings, as body, mind, and soul. But this started all the way with the Egyptians. But what happened before that? Like, how did that come about? It must have been some kind of like a renaissance of the era. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that didn't exist prior to the Renaissance. Things like, principles of universal principles, equality under the rule of law, right? The divine right of kings stopped existing, which is, where the idea of presidents came from. Mathematics, calculus, particularly, Leibniz and Isaac Newton basically co-created calculus out of nothing. So there was a lot of ideas that didn't exist prior to this. And so they must have had some kind of like an intellectual renaissance when it came to like the spirits, the afterlife, the consciousness that didn't exist prior. But in order for that to happen, there's a lot of historicity and a lot of context around that time and period that led up to all these things, just like it did, during the Renaissance or during the, theological Middle Ages, when St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas were writing some of the most seminal works in, ontology and Christianity and divine rights. So they must have had just something similar, but at that time. But what existed before that must have been pretty dark. Like when you consider how dark humanity was before the Renaissance.
Oh, look at the Middle Ages.
Yeah, the Middle Ages were horrible time.
Well, then that gets into like people like Tesla, and all of a sudden his ideas and theories. And he was asked many times, even Einstein. They asked Einstein, "What's it like to be the smartest man alive?" He's like, "I don't know. You should ask Tesla."
Nikola, yeah.
And he would describe it as they weren't his ideas. He was a beacon, and he had all sorts of like free. He felt like there was energy that you could tap into. He didn't care at all about money. He just wanted to do his thing, and the ideas that he had were so beyond what anybody had heard of. Like, how many different Teslas had been around throughout history, and then that gets into the divine. Are there certain people that get messages that parlay information in ways that are not just written and verbal? It comes from something else, which gets really interesting too.
Yeah, that kind of gets into like the mind and all that too, where like it could also be like certain people can tap into like we only use like 10% of our brains. But
Right.
maybe people like Tesla were using like, 17% or whatever and could tap into some shit,
And it's that other percentage being able to tap into some sort of other realm.
Yes.
That's been theorized. And then you talk about the CIA has papers on this stuff about they've even done experiments on Project Looking Glass about which gets really interesting about not being able to see directly into the future, but it's like they described it as seeing around a corner of the future.
Interesting.
Then you got the what is it? Not the kind of psychic abilities. They've all sorts of things. Like they've done a lot of this stuff, and have they created systems to suppress that in humans, knowing if you think about a government wanting to control people, if you want to control people, you don't allow them to go above your knowledge. And then did they create systems that kind of limited that too? Is other stuff that gets into the very, very weeds that I find interesting. I have no answers for, but I just find it interesting.
Right. Well, I mean, in a way, Jared, that kind of sounds like you're engineering, like you're purposely genetically engineering your society to be built a certain way. Like if you have a species who has a certain capabilities, and you're like, we don't want that here. Let's tweak this down. We can't be having that here in this.
Or if you had a group of people that were able to figure it out, and then that comes down to like, you talk about the Rockefeller types that have had this lineage of power and money for a long time, where they pass down certain, their secret societies and knowledge, were they given certain knowledge about how to do this stuff, and that gets permeated into what it would look like today in these systems. And if you look at too of like how easily people can be manipulated. I mean, look at social media. You can manipulate people on a daily basis with just propaganda on different levels. Is how much more capable are they to do that on different levels, I guess.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm like, even back with like, medieval times, right? People burning women at the stake, witches, right? And then just like all these things where like people had these beliefs about something that weren't actually true, right? The society is just like all mobbed together, like this is true, that's true, without really any evidence, like good evidence of something, and then they just take action.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they shouldn't have been witches. I mean, let's be honest here. They I'm just kidding.
He's a witch. Witch.
So I actually have another question about the pyramids for you guys, right? It kind of goes back to the fact of the UFO that went in the water, right? And OG, to your question about is there any underwater civilizations or alien bases, right? Could we have that underground, especially around ancient areas like the pyramids or any type of pyramid structure around the world?
Oh, well, look at Göbekli Tepe. They just said they're going to stop excavating that, and like why?
Yeah, what?
They're finding all this stuff. Yeah,
is that a funding problem?
I don't believe so. They're getting tons of tourism off of it. They did. I think they came out with that last year, where they basically said they're not going to excavate any further Göbekli Tepe, and you're just like, but every time they go down deeper, they're finding more stuff. It's like, then it gets into the pyramid thing of like, well, did you find something and you just don't want that out there? Because whether that is people's theories and they just want to protect it, or did they find something they just are worried about the general public knowing?
I think
You know,
I think the majority of it is people protecting their life's work. There's a lot of
I would agree.
gatekeeping in science, believe it or not. There's a lot of
There's a
gatekeeping.
ton. There's absolutely
Money has a lot to do with it. Egos has a lot to do with it. I mean, it's still the reason we're still talking about string theory. String theory hasn't produced any results in unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity and special relativity and the 30 years that it's existed, but people are still like, but string theory. I mean, it's a dead end. Like
Yeah.
you gotta off ramp at some point and look for better ideas, but it happens in all fields. It happens in sociology.
Oh yeah, people get
psychology,
tied.
archaeology.
You get tied to narratives, and if you
Yeah.
dedicated 20 years to something, it'd be hard to admit that you would think you wasted 20 years, and the power you've gained from it, you don't want to be looked at as a kook, so then you just try and suppress it.
Right, and also too, Slimer, I heard that funding was actually really hard. I read a couple years ago, there was an article that said there's actually like a lot of cases where there are scientific like journals or like publishing in these journals written for like let's say a study, right? But these studies don't have any actual concrete hard data, like factual data. Like they're just kind of like they kind of messed up the data on purpose to get their paper in these journals.
Happens all the time.
So you're already falsifying, the science end of everything, right? You're not putting out truthful, factual things. And
that's why peer reviewed journals are so important. And honestly, nothing has credibility unless it's been peer reviewed, and not just by people in the same field, but by logicians, because logicians can look at something and look at the logical structure, convert it over to logical notation, and they can look for logical fallacies, because there's a lot of logical fallacies that you might miss because you're not thinking logically per se, but you're just looking at data. And sometimes data and logic don't correspond. And you could say, oh, well, the data looks good, but the logic is unsound. And so there's a very what do you call it? There's a very layered filter that any sort of scientific proposition should have to go through before it can be claimed as something that either replaces an existing theory, which is very difficult because once you've reached the level of theory, you're pretty much unprovable. Like it's replicatable anywhere in the universe at all times. But even weaker so is going from a hypothesis to a theory, right? There should be a very high standard for what we say, hey, this is the fact about what we know of reality. But unfortunately, like you said, egos get in the way, money gets in the way. A lot of times it's like, hey, either you guys produce a paper that is well peer reviewed, or your funding stops. And a lot of it funding. That's a lot of it. It's funding. They get these threats and like they're just not producing anything, and the money runs dry. And so what they do is they falsify their shit. Happens a lot.
Now, gentlemen, we dipped into some stuff today. We did pyramids. We did Atlantis, dinosaurs. It was awesome. The thumbnail for this is going to be the wildest thumbnail ever.
You should
all like this, and it's like looking up.
Dude, it needs to be Marty and Doc Brown traveling through time, and they're like, "There's dinosaurs, pyramids, Neanderthals."
Oh,
the future.
And then also, I want Atlantis like flying up in the background,
yes.
Escaping a giant meteor.
Yeah.
Being lifted by George.
What the heck, bro?
I love it. But gentlemen, I love this stuff. We'll definitely got to do more of these kind of videos. I like diving into some deep stuff like this.
Oh yeah, I feel like we just like scratched the surface too. Like there's just so many. I mean, I didn't even talk about the moon, and that gets interesting, which I will.
Save that. Well, that might be the next one. We'll talk about the moon. Oh, I can't wait. Mr. Webba, it's good to have you back, brother. We'll have you on that moon video. I promise you, Webba. Where can everybody find you on social media?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on this video. It was a wonderful time. You can find me on all platforms at Mr. Webba 91. You can also find me right here on Orange Grove 55.
There he is. Jared, Capture the Magic. Where can everybody find you on social media, Jared?
You can find me at Cap the Magic on YouTube and social media. And if you're not on this topic, if you want theme park reviews and info, my wife and I have a podcast, CTM Podcast. You can find us on there. And I don't get to talk about this stuff on my channel often, but I thoroughly enjoy it. I don't claim to be an expert, but I have lots of questions that lead me down curious paths, and it's an interesting thing to talk about. So I appreciate you having me on as always. Always good time and discuss all the stuff with you fellas.
Absolutely. Love this stuff. Slime Square. Always good having you on, brother. Where can everybody find you on social media, sir?
Yeah, hey, really fun conversation. I didn't expect to be talking about pyramids on a podcast in my life at any time, but here we are. Jared, thank you for hopping on, and Webba and OG. But yeah, you guys can find me on X at Slime Square, and you can find me on Instagram at Slime Square 84.
There he is. There he is. I've been sending Slimer all the crazy Instagram reels because you're new to it. I'm kind of breaking you in, Slimer. You know what I'm saying?
I think, Slimer, you need to do a Disney adults. Did they build the pyramids? Because since they
Maybe I will. Well, what's crazy is some of the theories are even crazier over there than they are on pyramids and aliens. So yeah.
That's very
true.
true.
Oh man, dude, I swear. Before we go, I swear, like a lot of times, like we'll have like crazy conversations in our group chats. Like that stuff needs to be like on here, dude. Like,
Just like save it real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, save it. Wait.
Yeah. Or no, our group chats between the texts and the audios and all that stuff, man. It's awesome.
There's like 15 podcast episodes with the voice ones back and forth and be like, that just make a good podcast right there.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you. Everybody, I want to thank you for watching this episode of ODVD 5. Comment down below. We know you all have thoughts. Pyramids, dinosaurs, Atlantis, string theory, whatever it is. Comment down below. We would love to hear from you. And until the next time, see you.
Thank you so much for watching OG55. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and become a member today.